Well, that was a little unexpected. Did you jump? I jumped a little bit. What's up, guys, and thank you for stopping by the channel. Today's project is this Poulan Pro string trimmer, and the problem is that the pull string won't retract. This should be a moderately difficult repair, but as you just saw, there's always a surprise waiting for us. I'm not sure how you feel about Poulan products. I don't think they're all that bad, just some have bad designs. A pull string that doesn't retract would usually indicate that the spring is broken inside and will need to be replaced. However, it's not that easy on this type of trimmer. The recoil and the cover are one piece, and getting it out requires a lot of work. I think it was a Ryobi trimmer that I worked on last year that was the toughest repair as far as recoils go. I would have classified that repair as highly technical and not a repair worth paying for. If we pull on the rope, you can see it's not returning like it should. However, if the engine were running though, it would allow the rope to gradually roll back into the cover. I now appreciate engines that have recoils that are located on the back of the engines and only require a few minutes to remove it. Let's get going on the repairs now. Begin by removing almost every bolt you can find on all the plastic covers. There are 3 bolts on the rear cover, but I'm only going to remove the one by the fuel tank right now. I'll remove the other 2 later on. Next, there are 4 bolts holding the shaft to the engine. These 4 are fine threads, so don't get them mixed up with the other ones. Now we can carefully separate the engine from the shaft, exposing the clutch drum. We need to remove the entire clutch assembly to be able to remove the cover, but we need to keep the engine from turning over as we do that. To keep the engine from turning, remove the spark plug and put some thick rope into the engine, and this will keep the engine from turning as we turn on the crankshaft. Now do this at your own risk, as this can be very dangerous for the engine. The rope could get stuck inside either the intake or the exhaust port while doing this. You'll need to get quite a bit of rope into the engine, and as you saw, I have the rope doubled over to make this a lot quicker and easier. Now that all the rope is in there and the engine won't turn, you can now use a small Torx to remove the bolt holding the clutch drum to the engine shaft. Next, we need to spin the clutch off the engine shaft. And to do this, I'm sure there's a special tool that we're supposed to use. However, I find that a tool that removes the keeper on my Harbor Freight angle grinder works just as well. If you don't have either tool, then a medium adjustable wrench will work. This unfortunately is my larger one, but it should work just as well. Just grab it by the raised part in the middle and turn it as indicated on the assembly to remove it. And once it's loose, just spin the clutch off and remove the larger washer underneath it. Now we'll have to remove the other 2 screws from the rear cover before we can separate the engine cover from the engine. So here's the recoil, and it looks to be binding against the plastic retainer. Let's try removing the bolts on the retainer and see if the rope will pull back in. Okay, there it goes. So there seems to be too much friction against the pulley right now. Okay, let's remove the retainer and try lubricating all the contact surfaces and the spring and see if it keeps from binding in the future. There isn't any problems with the retainer, so I'm not sure if I can figure out why it started binding against the pulley all of a sudden. Well, it seems to work just fine, but I'm still going to take this opportunity to lubricate any friction points and the spring, of course. Wait for it. And there's the money shot. Well, that was pretty silly of me to work the recoil without the retainer in, but it was actually for the better. Of course, I have to wind the spring back up, which isn't that tough, it just gets really tiring. Once the spring is wound up, put it back in its metal cup. But this is where I realized what happened. The anchor point is on the left side, but before that I noticed it wasn't there, it was actually on the opposite side of the cover. I have a theory as to what happened, but let's put this thing back together first. So here's the pulley, and here's the point that'll grab the open end of the spring that's barely exposed on the inside of the cup. And once it's in place, grab the rope and maneuver it into one of the open notches on the pulley. This is where it's going to allow you to spin the pulley with the rope and preload the spring. And after you turn the pulley a couple of times, let the rope out and let it wind up on the pulley, and make sure all the rope gets pulled into the cover. It looks as though we were pretty close, but let's wind the pulley one more time. Just make sure you don't overwind the spring, otherwise it will bind up when pulling on it. Now that it's working the way we want it to, let's reinstall the plastic retainer onto the cover. There's not much left to do except reinstall the cover, replacing the clutch components, reinstalling the shaft to the engine, and all the covers and screws. So here's my theory. I believe the recoil spring was installed incorrectly at the factory. I believe the anchor came out of its spot during installation, and it fortunately grabbed one of the posts for the retainer. Once the plastic retainer was bolted in place, it held the spring's anchor in the wrong position for quite some time. It wouldn't have been a problem except the spring moved the pulley into the plastic retainer, and after some time the retainer wore down and allowed even more room in the spring's cup that it bound up the last time it was used. Now I didn't move in close enough for a shot, but there was a mark pressed into the yellow plastic cover that shows that the spring was there for a long time. I also didn't show the wear on the 3 pads of the retainer, but it all makes sense. I hate to say it, but it all boils down to human error. All in all, it wasn't a difficult repair, except for the spring coming out. But if this were a commercial unit, we would never have to take the plastic covers off at all. I'm pretty sure this thing doesn't have a starting or running problem, but just to make sure, let's start it up and try it out. So here's my question to you. After seeing this video, would you tackle this repair or let somebody else do it?
Thank you for watching. I really appreciate your time. Please feel free to ask any questions, and I hope to see you in my next video.